What if the sentence that changed your life was spoken by someone who never even learned your name? The interviewer smiled, expecting another polished answer from one of the most influential business leaders in America. Instead, Victoria Sterling became unusually quiet. The dazzling ballroom, filled with executives, entrepreneurs, journalists, and television cameras, slowly faded into the background as she looked toward the far end of the room. Crystal chandeliers reflected warm golden light across hundreds of elegantly dressed guests. Yet her attention rested on a single man standing quietly beside a young girl near the entrance. The audience noticed the change in her expression before they heard her voice. 8 months ago, she said softly, a single father whispered one sentence to me. He did not know my name. He did not know my title. He certainly did not know my bank account. But somehow he saw something no one else had seen in years. The room fell completely silent. Even the photographers lowered their cameras, sensing that what came next was more important than any headline they could write. Victoria smiled gently, though her eyes carried the unmistakable warmth of someone remembering the exact moment life quietly changed direction. People often believe success arrives with applause, she continued. Mine arrived beside a lonely highway in Montana. No one interrupted. No one even reached for a glass of water. Hundreds of strangers waited together, connected by curiosity alone. Victoria looked down for only a brief moment before lifting her eyes again. I have been asked countless times what inspired the biggest change in my leadership, my priorities, and even my understanding of happiness. She paused, allowing the silence to breathe naturally through the enormous ballroom. It was not a board meeting. It was not a financial crisis. It was not a billion-dollar decision. Another quiet smile crossed her face. It was one sentence. Several reporters instinctively leaned forward, ready to write every word. Instead of revealing it, Victoria simply shook her head almost playfully. I'm not going to tell you what he said. Not yet. Gentle laughter rippled across the audience before disappearing just as quickly. Because if I tell you now, she continued, you will hear the words, but you will never understand why they mattered. She slowly turned her head toward the quiet man standing beside the little girl. Ethan Brooks remained exactly as he had always been, wearing a simple navy suit that fit comfortably rather than perfectly, one hand resting gently on his daughter's shoulder. Lily smiled proudly, without understanding why so many important people kept glancing in their direction. Ethan simply nodded politely, almost hoping the attention would pass as quietly as it had arrived. Victoria looked back toward the audience. Before you can understand one sentence, she said, you have to understand the heart of the man who spoke it and the woman who desperately needed to hear it. A gentle applause began somewhere near the center of the ballroom before spreading naturally throughout the audience. Yet Ethan did not clap, and neither did Victoria. They simply exchanged a quiet smile across the room, one that carried gratitude rather than celebration. It was the kind of smile shared only between two people who knew that the greatest turning points rarely announce themselves with noise. Sometimes they arrive on an ordinary afternoon beneath a wide Montana sky, carried by the wind, spoken by a stranger, and remembered forever because they reach a place inside the human heart that success, wealth, and recognition could never touch. 8 months earlier, on a quiet stretch of highway where endless mountains met the horizon, neither of them had any idea that destiny was about to begin with nothing more than a broken car, a simple act of kindness, and a sentence that would remain hidden just a little longer. The Montana sky stretched endlessly above miles of open highway as the last traces of morning fog disappeared beneath gentle autumn sunshine. Victoria Sterling tightened her grip on the steering wheel, surprised by how peaceful the landscape felt compared to the constant rhythm of Manhattan. Her schedule had been planned down to the minute, beginning with an inspection of a potential manufacturing site before flying back to New York that same evening. Every phone call had already been arranged. Every meeting had an agenda. Every decision carried the weight of thousands of employees. She was accustomed to solving problems measured in billions of dollars. Yet she had completely forgotten that even the most carefully planned journey could be interrupted by something as ordinary as an unexpected mechanical failure. A warning light appeared on the dashboard, followed by another. The luxury sedan gradually lost power until she carefully guided it onto the gravel shoulder beside the empty highway. She sat quietly for a moment, listening to the engine settle into silence. There was no frustration on her face, only exhaustion. She reached for her phone, but the signal flickered between one weak bar and none at all. Her assistant would already be wondering why she had missed the next conference call. Somewhere in New York, executives were waiting for her approval on contracts worth millions. Out here, none of those titles seemed to matter. A cool breeze carried the scent of pine trees through the slightly opened window, while distant birds crossed the enormous blue sky. For the first time in months, there was nothing demanding her immediate attention except the quiet sound of nature itself. Then, from a distance, she noticed an aging blue pickup truck approaching at a steady pace. It slowed without hesitation before pulling safely onto the shoulder several yards ahead of her vehicle. A tall man stepped out wearing worn blue jeans, sturdy brown work boots, and a faded denim work shirt with sleeves rolled neatly above his forearms. His movements were calm, unhurried, and confident, as though helping strangers had become part of his ordinary routine rather than an interruption to it. He tipped his head politely before speaking with an easy smile. "Morning. Looks like your car is asking for a break." Victoria returned a small smile she had not expected to give. Apparently it chose today. He glanced toward the silent engine before looking back at her. "Would you mind if I took a look?" There was no curiosity about who she was, no attempt to impress her, and no expectation of anything in return. She simply nodded and stepped aside. The man carefully opened the hood and examined the engine with patient attention while sunlight reflected softly across polished metal and drifting clouds. He never rushed. He never complained. Every movement suggested years of honest work performed with quiet pride. Victoria watched him in silence, wondering why someone she had met less than a minute earlier already seemed more at peace than people she had worked beside for decades. Neither of them realized that this ordinary roadside stop was becoming the beginning of a story neither success nor careful planning could have written. Ethan Brooks gently closed the hood after several careful minutes and wiped his hands with a clean shop towel that had clearly spent years riding in the back of his pickup truck. He looked at the engine one more time before offering a reassuring smile. "You should be able to make it into Cedar Ridge without any trouble now. There's a small garage there where I can replace the worn part properly if you have a little time." Victoria glanced at her phone once again. There was still almost no signal, and the dozens of unread notifications suddenly felt strangely unimportant against the quiet beauty surrounding them. "I suppose I do," she answered with a small laugh that surprised even herself. Ethan nodded politely. "Just follow me. It is about 10 miles from here." They drove through winding roads bordered by golden cottonwood trees and wide ranches where horses grazed peacefully beneath an endless blue sky. When they reached the small town, Ethan pulled into a modest garage with a weathered wooden sign that simply read Brooks Auto Repair. There were no polished glass walls, no luxury waiting lounge, and no expensive artwork. Instead, there were shelves lined with carefully organized tools, framed photographs of local families, handwritten thank you notes pinned to a bulletin board, and colorful drawings made by children decorating one corner of the office. Before Victoria could take another look around, a cheerful little girl ran through the open doorway, carrying a backpack almost as large as herself. "Dad," she called, excitedly, "I got 100% on my spelling test." Ethan knelt immediately, smiling with unmistakable pride. "I knew you could do it, Lily." She handed him the paper, and he celebrated her accomplishment as though she had won a national championship. Victoria watched quietly from across the garage. She had attended corporate celebrations worth millions of dollars that felt less genuine than this simple moment between a father and his daughter. Lily finally noticed the unfamiliar visitor and offered a polite smile exactly as her father had done earlier. "Hello." "Hello," Victoria replied warmly. "Congratulations on your spelling test." Lily beamed. "Thank you." Ethan stood and introduced them without mentioning anything about titles or careers. "Lily, this is Victoria. Her car decided today, was a good day to take a vacation. Lily giggled. Cars can be stubborn. Victoria laughed softly, feeling the invisible wall she usually carried around herself becoming just a little lighter. While Ethan worked carefully inside the garage, Lily sat at a nearby table, finishing homework with colored pencils spread neatly across the surface. Every few minutes, Ethan glanced toward her, offering encouragement with nothing more than a smile. He never seemed rushed. He answered every question she asked with patience, even while replacing the damaged component beneath the hood. Victoria noticed something she rarely saw in boardrooms filled with accomplished leaders. Ethan gave his full attention to whatever was directly in front of him. When he repaired a vehicle, nothing else existed. When Lily spoke, she became the most important person in the room. Success, she realized, might not always be measured by numbers, headlines, or impressive offices. Sometimes it looked like grease-stained hands, a small garage in Montana, and a father who never allowed the world to convince his daughter that she was anything less than extraordinary. Victoria expected to leave Cedar Ridge as soon as the repair was finished. But when Ethan handed her the keys with his familiar easy smile, she found herself standing there a little longer than necessary. Everything should be running smoothly. Now, he said, you ought to have a safe drive back. She accepted the keys and looked at the invoice he had written by hand. The amount was surprisingly modest. I think you forgot something, she said. Ethan glanced down at the paper before smiling. No, I charged for the part and the time it took. That is all. Victoria reached in her purse and offered several larger bills. Please, your help today was worth much more than this. Ethan shook his head almost immediately. I appreciate the thought, but I do not charge people for kindness. For just a moment, Victoria did not know how to respond. She had spent years in a world where nearly everything had a price, a contract, or an expectation attached to it. Yet this man declined extra money with the same calm confidence he had shown while repairing her car. Lily looked up from her homework and smiled as though this conversation happened every week. Dad always says people remember how you treat them longer than what you charge them. Ethan laughed softly. Sometimes she remembers my words better than I do. Victoria smiled, feeling something unfamiliar settle quietly inside her. Before she stepped outside, Lily hurried over carrying a small paper bag. Mrs. Henderson from next door baked extra apple muffins this morning, she said. She always gives us too many. Would you like one for your trip? Victoria accepted the bag with genuine gratitude. Thank you, Lily. That is very thoughtful. You are welcome, the little girl answered proudly. As Victoria prepared to leave, she paused beside the driver's door and looked back toward the garage. Ethan was already cleaning his tools, placing every wrench and socket back into its proper place before beginning another repair on an older family sedan that had just arrived. He did not stand waiting for praise. He did not ask for a business card. He did not wonder whether she might become an important customer. To him, she had simply been another traveler who needed help. Victoria slowly walked back toward him. May I ask you something? Ethan looked up. Of course. Do you ever wish you had chosen a different life? He considered the question carefully instead of answering immediately. His eyes drifted toward Lily, who was now laughing while helping an elderly customer carry a small box into the office. A warm breeze carried the scent of pine trees through the open garage door as wind chimes hanging from the porch echoed softly in the afternoon air. Ethan finally smiled, not because the question was simple, but because the answer had become clear to him long ago. Life gave me different plans than the ones I imagined, he said gently. But every morning I wake up beside my daughter, I get to solve honest problems for honest people, and every evening I know I did my best. I have learned not to measure a good life by what it impresses. I measure it by what it protects. Victoria lowered her eyes for a brief moment, quietly absorbing every word. She had heard thousands of speeches delivered by celebrated leaders, best-selling authors, and respected consultants, yet none of them had settled into her heart quite like the quiet wisdom spoken inside this small Montana garage. She thanked Ethan once more, climbed into her sedan, and slowly drove away, unaware that before the sun disappeared behind the mountains, she would hear one final sentence from him that would remain with her long after every boardroom presentation had been forgotten. Victoria had driven nearly 5 miles beyond Cedar Ridge before she noticed the paper bag resting on the passenger seat. The warm scent of fresh apples and cinnamon still lingered inside the car, filling the quiet cabin with a comforting familiarity she could not remember experiencing in years. She smiled almost instinctively before breaking off a small piece of the muffin. It tasted homemade, imperfect in appearance but perfect in every other way. Her phone finally recovered a strong signal, and within seconds it erupted with missed calls, urgent messages, and calendar reminders. The peaceful silence she had briefly borrowed from Montana disappeared beneath the demands of her ordinary life. Her assistant called immediately. "Victoria, everyone is waiting for the investment review. The board is already gathered." Victoria glanced into the rearview mirror where the road leading back toward Brooks Auto Repair had nearly vanished behind rolling hills. "Tell them I will be there this evening," she answered calmly. "We can move the meeting by an hour." There was a brief silence on the other end. "Are you certain? They have never waited before." Victoria looked once more toward the distant mountains. "Today they can." She ended the call and continued driving, yet something kept pulling her thoughts backward instead of forward. She replayed every conversation from the afternoon. Ethan never asked what she did for a living. He never searched her face with curiosity after seeing the expensive car. He never treated her with either admiration or suspicion. He simply treated her with respect. That realization unsettled her more than she cared to admit. For years, nearly every introduction had been shaped by her position, her reputation, or the value others believed she represented. Somewhere along the way, she had forgotten what it felt like to meet someone who expected nothing. The highway stretched peacefully across the open valley until she reached a scenic overlook where the mountains seemed endless beneath the soft amber light of late afternoon. Without thinking, she slowed the car and pulled into the empty overlook. She stepped outside and breathed deeply, allowing the cool mountain air to replace the recycled air of airports, boardrooms, and executive offices. The wind gently moved her hair while dry leaves drifted across the pavement. Everything felt wonderfully ordinary. As she stood there, another pickup truck approached from the opposite direction before slowing beside her. Ethan leaned slightly toward the open window with the same relaxed smile she had already begun to recognize. "I wanted to make sure the repair held up," he called. "Victoria smailed warmly. It runs perfectly." Ethan nodded with quiet satisfaction. "Good. That is what I hoped." For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. They simply looked toward the mountains glowing beneath the lowering sun. Finally, Victoria laughed softly. "You really stopped just to check on my car?" Ethan shrugged. "The car, yes. And maybe the driver, too." She looked at him with genuine surprise. There was still no trace of curiosity about her status, no attempt to impress her. Only simple human kindness offered as naturally as breathing. Ethan rested one arm casually against the truck door before speaking again, his voice gentle enough that the breeze almost carried it away. He leaned just a little closer and quietly whispered a single sentence that settled into the deepest corner of Victoria's heart. And although the words themselves remained unheard by everyone else, the expression on her face changed instantly, as if someone had gently reminded her of a truth she had forgotten long before she ever became the woman the world believed it knew. When Victoria finally returned to New York that evening, the city welcomed her with its familiar rhythm of flashing lights, crowded avenues, and schedules measured to the minute instead of the season. Her driver met her at the airport exactly on time, and by the time she reached Sterling Dynamics headquarters, the executive board was already waiting inside the top-floor conference room overlooking the Manhattan skyline. Charts filled enormous digital displays. Financial forecasts covered every screen. Advisors greeted her with polished confidence, while assistants quietly distributed reports across the long walnut table. Normally, Victoria could absorb every number within minutes and guide the discussion with remarkable precision. Tonight was different. As the meeting began, one executive enthusiastically described projected quarterly growth while another outlined an aggressive expansion strategy across 3 additional states. Victoria listened respectfully, but her thoughts drifted somewhere far beyond the glass walls surrounding the conference room. She remembered the quiet sound of wind moving through the pine trees outside Brooks' auto repair. She remembered Lily proudly holding her spelling test. Most of all, she remembered the expression on Ethan's face after whispering those few unforgettable words before simply wishing her a safe drive home. She could still hear his calm voice, even though the sentence itself remained locked safely inside her memory. "Victoria," one board member asked politely, "would you like to approve the proposal?" She looked toward the presentation before answering more slowly than usual. "Let us review the long-term impact first." Several people exchanged surprised glances. Normally, she encouraged speed, efficiency, and decisive action. Tonight, she wanted reflection. The discussion continued for another hour, yet Victoria asked more questions about employees than profits, more questions about local communities than projected market value. Her leadership had not changed overnight, but something inside her perspective quietly had. Later that evening, after everyone else had gone home, Victoria remained alone inside her office while Manhattan sparkled beneath the dark sky. The city looked magnificent from 40 stories above the streets. Yet she had never felt the distance between success and peace more clearly. She walked toward the floor-to-ceiling windows and rested one hand lightly against the cool glass. Below, thousands of people hurried through another ordinary night, each carrying invisible hopes and burdens of their own. She thought about Ethan closing his garage each evening without reporters waiting outside or shareholders expecting impossible results. She wondered whether fulfillment could truly exist without constant recognition. Her phone buzzed with another invitation to an exclusive charity gala. She quietly declined it. Another message requested an interview celebrating the company's latest achievements. She postponed it until the following week. Instead, she opened the small paper bag Lily had given her earlier that day. One apple muffin remained untouched. She smiled softly before taking another bite, and for reasons she could not fully explain, it tasted less like dessert and more like home. Sitting alone at her desk, she realized that for the first time in many years, she was not thinking about what she wanted to accomplish next. She was thinking about the kind of person she wanted to become. Somewhere beneath the same wide American sky, Ethan was probably closing his garage, helping Lily finish homework, and preparing for another ordinary morning. He had no idea that his quiet kindness had followed Victoria all the way across the country, settling gently into the busiest corner of her life and refusing to leave. The days that followed settled back into their familiar rhythm. Yet something inside Victoria refused to return to the life she had always considered normal. Every morning began with executive briefings, investment reports, and strategic meetings. But every quiet moment between them carried her thoughts thousands of miles west to a small garage beneath the Montana sky. She found herself pausing before approving decisions, asking questions she had never asked before. How would this affect families? Would this help the people doing the actual work? Could success be measured by something greater than quarterly growth? Her senior leadership team noticed the change almost immediately. During one meeting, the chief financial officer presented a proposal to automate several regional facilities. The numbers promised impressive savings, and the recommendation received immediate support around the table. Victoria remained silent while everyone waited for her decision. Instead of approving the proposal as expected, she calmly asked, how many parents would lose their jobs? The room became unusually quiet. No one had prepared that answer because no one had expected the question. Later that afternoon, her longtime executive assistant, Margaret, entered the office carrying a neatly organized folder. She had worked beside Victoria for more than 12 years and understood subtle changes better than anyone. You have been different since your trip, Margaret observed gently. Victoria smiled without looking away from the city beyond her office windows. Have I? Margaret nodded. You seem lighter somehow. You're listening more than you are speaking. Victoria turned slowly. Do you think that is a weakness? Margaret smiled warmly. No, I think it is something people have been hoping to see for a very long time. Those words stayed with Victoria throughout the evening. Before leaving the office, she opened her calendar and quietly canceled another series of social engagements that no longer felt meaningful. Instead, she searched a map of Montana until she found the familiar road leading to Cedar Ridge. Her finger rested lightly above the small town before she closed the application again. Back in Montana, life continued exactly as it always had. Ethan opened Brooks Auto Repair before sunrise, brewed fresh coffee, greeted regular customers by their first names, and laughed as Lily hurried toward the school bus with a backpack bouncing against her shoulders. Nothing about his routine suggested that he had unknowingly become the reason one of the most influential business leaders in America was questioning the direction of her own life. Late one afternoon, Ethan received a handwritten thank you card from an elderly couple whose truck he had repaired the previous week. Lily smiled while reading the note aloud. They said you reminded them that kindness still exists. Ethan folded the card carefully and placed it beside dozens of similar notes pinned across the garage wall. People are kind every day, he said quietly. Sometimes they simply need someone else to notice first. As the sun began sinking behind the mountains, a sleek black sedan appeared at the far end of the street before slowing as it approached the garage. Ethan glanced up from his work, recognizing the vehicle before he recognized the driver. The car came to a gentle stop, and Victoria stepped out wearing simple jeans, comfortable boots, and a light sweater instead of an executive suit. For the first time since they had met, she had traveled to Montana without a board meeting, a corporate schedule, or any official reason at all. She had come because some journeys begin with a broken automobile, but the most important ones begin when the heart quietly decides it is finally ready to return. From that afternoon forward, Victoria found herself returning to Cedar Ridge whenever her calendar allowed, never with an official announcement and never with a convoy of assistants. She arrived quietly, usually driving herself, dressed simply enough that most people in town saw only another visitor passing through. Ethan never treated those visits as extraordinary. He greeted her with the same easy smile he offered every customer, handed her a cup of fresh coffee without asking how she liked it, because he had already remembered, and continued working until the task in front of him was finished. There was something deeply comforting about the predictability of his kindness. One Saturday morning, after the garage closed early, Ethan invited Victoria and Lily to spend the afternoon at a nearby lake where local families often gathered before winter arrived. The water reflected the bright blue sky so perfectly that the mountains appeared to stand both above and below the horizon. Lily skipped small stones across the surface while laughing every time one bounced farther than expected. Victoria tried the same thing and quickly discovered she was not very good at it, which only made Lily laugh harder. Ethan watched the two of them with quiet amusement before handing Victoria another smooth stone. "Do not throw harder," he said gently. "Throw calmer." She smiled. "That sounds like advice for more than skipping rocks." Ethan shrugged with a soft laugh. "Maybe it is." She released the next stone with less force, and it skipped 4 times before disappearing into the water. Lily clapped as though she had witnessed something remarkable. The afternoon unfolded without schedules or expectations. They shared sandwiches prepared that morning, watched a pair of bald eagles circle high above the valley, and listened as gentle wind moved through tall pine trees along the shoreline. Victoria realized she had not checked her phone in hours. When she finally looked at it, there were dozens of unread messages waiting for her attention. She quietly placed it back inside her jacket without opening a single one. Ethan noticed, but said nothing. Silence, she had learned, was one of his greatest gifts. It never felt uncomfortable around him. Instead, it created space for people to hear thoughts they had ignored for years. As the sun drifted lower, painting the lake with warm shades of gold and amber, Victoria spoke more honestly than she had intended. "Sometimes I wonder whether I build a successful company because I love the work or because I was afraid to stop working." Ethan looked across the water before answering. "Only you can know that." She nodded slowly. "I always believed that if I kept achieving more, eventually life would become quieter. Ethan smiled gently. Sometimes we spend years climbing a ladder before realizing it has been leaning against the wrong wall. Victoria looked toward him, surprised by how naturally wisdom seemed to emerge from ordinary conversation. "Do you ever regret not chasing something bigger?" she asked softly. Ethan glanced toward Lily, who was carefully collecting colorful leaves along the shore with complete delight. "Every evening I come home, knowing my daughter still believes I will be there tomorrow," he replied. "That has always felt bigger than anything else." Victoria lowered her eyes, feeling those words settle beside the mysterious sentence he had whispered days earlier. Neither lesson demanded that she abandon her career. Neither suggested that success itself was wrong. Instead, both quietly asked the same question she had avoided for years. What was all that success truly protecting? As the first evening stars appeared above the Montana mountains, Victoria realized she had stopped searching for peace in places that could only offer achievement, and she silently wondered whether the life she had been building was finally beginning to resemble the life she had always hoped to live. Several months later, the same grand ballroom that had opened this story was filled once again with leaders, innovators, and journalists from across the country. The evening celebrated companies that had demonstrated not only financial excellence, but also meaningful contributions to the communities they served. Sterling Dynamics had received national recognition for expanding employee family programs, investing in small towns, and creating opportunities that valued people as much as performance. Reporters called it an extraordinary transformation. Victoria simply called it overdue. As she stood behind the podium beneath the warm glow of crystal chandeliers, she looked across the audience until her eyes found Ethan Brooks and Lily seated quietly near the back of the room. They had accepted her invitation only after she promised that no one expected them to stand on a stage or become the center of attention. Ethan had smiled and replied that he preferred fixing engines to giving speeches. That answer had made Victoria laugh just as easily as it had the first time they met. She looked back toward the audience before speaking with calm sincerity. "People have asked me for months what changed inside me," she said. "Many believed it was a new strategy or a different business model. The truth is much simpler. I met someone who reminded me that success is not measured by what follows your name. It is measured by what remains in your heart after everyone stops applauding." The room grew wonderfully still. Victoria stepped away from the podium and slowly walked through the audience instead of waiting for the applause to end. She stopped beside Ethan, who stood respectfully as she approached. For a moment, they simply smiled at one another exactly as they had beside that quiet Montana highway. Victoria spoke softly enough that only Ethan could hear. "Would you tell me that sentence one more time?" Ethan looked at her with the same gentle kindness that had never changed despite everything that had happened since they first met. He smiled and quietly repeated the words that had traveled with her every single day. "Do not spend your whole life becoming someone the world admires if you forget to remain someone your own heart can recognize." Victoria closed her eyes briefly as emotion and gratitude met in the peaceful silence between them. When she looked up again, she was smiling through grateful tears that never became sorrow because they belonged to healing instead. She turned toward the audience and repeated the sentence aloud, allowing every person in the ballroom to hear the words that had once been carried only by the Montana wind. No one reached for a microphone. No one interrupted the silence. Some people lowered their heads thoughtfully, while others quietly held the hands of those sitting beside them. There was no dramatic celebration because none was needed. The truth had arrived gently, exactly as it always had. After the ceremony ended, Ethan, Victoria, and Lily stepped outside into the cool evening air where the lights of the city shimmered against the night sky. Lily slipped her hand into her father's while Victoria stood beside them without speaking. The silence no longer felt empty. It felt complete. Somewhere beyond the bright skyline, another morning would soon arrive in Montana. Another garage door would open. Another family would need honest help. And another ordinary day would quietly begin. The world would probably remember Victoria Sterling as a remarkable chief executive officer. But she hoped that, Long after every award had gathered dust, someone might also remember that she learned her greatest lesson from a single father who never tried to change the world. He simply chose to protect his dignity, extend kindness without expectation, and speak one quiet sentence at exactly the right moment. Sometimes that is how miracles begin, not with noise, but with grace that echoes long after the words themselves have been spoken.